Good morning and welcome to this webinar. Today, we will be looking into climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and especially the new insight from the European Environment Agency's report on nature-based solution. This webinar is organized in collaboration with European Environment Agency and the European Topic Center on Climate Change Impact, Vulnerability and Adaptation. The webinar is hosted by Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, which is a largest Italian multidisciplinary research center that is covering all aspects of climate change, from climate modeling up to climate impact and climate adaptation and mitigation policies. CMCC is also provided to Copernicus Climate Change Service in Europe. Is focal point of IPCC in Italy and runs the competence center, the European Topic Center on Climate Change, Vulnerability and Adaptation on the behalf of European Environment Agency. We are covering a number of things, starting from Earth modeling and marine modeling, impact of climate change on cities, energy and energy transition, impact on poverty and migration, water, food and land use, inequalities and global policies. Today, the webinar is registered, and you might post your question anytime during the talks of our distinguished panel. And of course, you can post any question regarding the webinar to webinar@cmcc.it. Now, let me quickly introduce our distinguished panelists. My co-moderator is Sergio Castellari. Sergio Castellari is a senior scientist at the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology in Bologna, in Italy. He previously worked at European Environment Agency as a seconded expert, and he coordinated this report while working at the EEA. He also worked at Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change and participated in a number of high-level policy negotiation on climate change, including IPCC, UNFCCC, UNCCD, and many others. He holds a degree in physics and PhD in meteorology and physical oceanography. Our second speaker is Marianne Zandersen from Aarhus University and Aarhus University Interdisciplinary Center for Climate Change. She's a senior researcher in environmental economics and has 20 years long experience working with research and advisory services across Europe, Africa, and Asia. She is currently the coordinator of Horizon 2020 project Red Green that started 2 years ago and still will continue until 2023, as well as many other European funded projects. She holds a PhD from the Hamburg University and the International Max Planck Research School on Earth System Modeling in Germany. Our second speaker is Clara Veerkamp from the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency. Clara's research focuses on how nature can help to address sustainability challenges and contribute to people's well-being. She's contributing to Horizon 2020 project Naturebased, which is about to be closed this year, and a member of the ETCCCA as any speaker from our distinguished panel. And my name is Mysiak. I am from Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. I'm leading the research division on risk assessment and adaptation strategies. And I'm also part of the scientific committee of the European Environment Agency. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Sergio to give us an overview about the report and the key messages from the report. Sergio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yaro. I will start to share my screen. Okay, so I want to thank, first of all, EEA and also CMCC and the European Topic Center on Climate Change, Impact, Vulnerability and Adaptation They are all key players along with other institutions in this long-term project, which took about 2 years of work to go to the publication of this report on the nature-based solution in Europe. So this is a report which, as I said, combine a large number of authors. In the center, you see the two coordinators, myself and Emiliano Ramieri from TETIS and from the ETC-CCA, the topic center, and the lead author. We had 10 lead author and a large number of contributing author. And among this lead author, Marianne and Clara, which will present part of this report today, but also I want to mention the other one, McKenna Davis, Johannes Foster, Mika Martunen, and Jaroslav Mysiak already has presented himself, Marie van der Waal, and Silvia Meder, and José Ramón Picatoste. All this, they work directly in the last 2 years in a scoping paper along with other colleagues and in the report on MBS. Then we had the contributing author, we had an advisory group, including experts also from the Commission, from DG Climate, DG ENV, DG ECO, and GRC. And also we had in the advisory group coordinators or deputy coordinators of this H2020 project called as MBS demonstration project. Beside, as all the different reports of the European Environment Agency, they've been a review from the AONET network, so from different member states participating to this network coordinated from the EEA. Now, what are the nature-based solutions? Now they're becoming a very fashionable term, and we know that has been mentioned also in the recent European Green Deal. Here I show to you the key point about MBS, which have been defined from the European Commission. So basic are solution to societal challenge. We have societal challenge which they pose a big question for our development, for our socio-economical development, for the ecosystem serving. So solution inspired to nature, using nature, preserving nature to try to address the societal challenges. In this case, we're talking about the two combined crises, which are biodiversity loss and degradation of ecosystem and climate change adaptation and mitigation. So this nature-based solution, they also provide cost-effective solution, which provide multi-benefit. In our report, we address one side of the climate change issue, which is adaptation. So building up resilience in our society, in the ecosystem. And the MBS, they provide that, but also they provide multiple benefits for mitigation to climate change, for environment, for health, for tourism, for food, for recreation and well-being. So another point which I want to also mention is the fact that there are different terms which have been used to define this solution inspired to the nature. So we have, during the last 10, 15 years in Europe, also at a global level, many different terms, they appear in different documents, in different fora. So I just want to mention, for example, the ecosystem-based approach, which appear in the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the green infrastructure, or the blue-green infrastructure. And also, for example, the natural water retention measure, which they came out at the European level when we were working on the flood prevention. So the report. The report, as I mentioned, is a teamwork at the European level with a very solid review, and includes 6 chapters and several annexes. The first chapter, the introduction, is about the definition of MBS as an umbrella concept including all the terms which I showed in the previous slide. Then we have a chapter on the global and European policy support to the MBS. Then we have a chapter on the knowledge base in specific sector which we define, such as water management, the forestry, the agriculture, the urban space, the coastal area, and the mountains. And these are also the sector which they've been used to analyze different cases, 97 cases at the European level, which have been analyzed to see the different innovation applied in this chapter. And about the knowledge base, the colleague Clara Veerkamp will present in further detail, and about the example and the case study, Marianne Zandersen will explain about the chapter 4. Then we have the financing of MBS, which is a very, very important issue, which is emerging very strongly in the last year. Jaroslav Mysiak, the co-moderator of this event, he was the lead author of this chapter. And then we have the conclusion, which is about the opportunities, so how much we can mainstream more, integrating MBS in the different sector of the European policy. Then I want to mention a couple of annexes, the 11 example case. So among these 97, some cases have been selected, and Marianne will provide further insight about this. And then we have also the different knowledge platform, 12 at the European level, which they've been used to extract this about 100 case study. So the chapter 2, which I had the leadership with McKenna Davis from Ecologic, is a chapter where we analyze the global policy, the relevant global policy framework and the relevant European framework for MBS. So we went through the UNFCCC, the CBD, the UNFCCC, the Ramsar Convention, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and at the European level went through all the different strategy and directives which they've been mentioning, the different terms of the included in the umbrella concept of MBS. What do we come out in this chapter? The fact that already now we have a good level of integration of MBS at the European and global level, especially in the framework dealing with sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation, and environment. The United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda can be used even further to directly and indirectly link nature and the biodiversity to climate change and promoting MBS in the different sector and scaling up the implementation to go into a transformative change, as has been mentioned in different documents at the global level and at the European level. We need to start to plan a transformative change in our society in order to preserve biodiversity and to address in an efficient way the climate change crisis. Then we need to increase anyway the level of ambition of our policy to support MBS at the European level. This will enhance the coherence between the different policies. The Green Deal as a roadmap, a recent roadmap, is trying to do that. We are basically in the Green Deal different challenges, the biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, the climate change, the pollution, the sustainability. All these are embedded inside of one policy roadmap, and there the MBS, they play a big role in the Green Deal. And finally, there is a need we found in our analysis at the policy level for European Union to install agreed standards, quantitative and measurable indicator to assess the progress, the performance, the effectiveness, the cost-benefit ratio, and the benefit of the nature-based solution. So this is basically the chapter 2, and I invite Jaroslav to go on with the webinar with the other colleagues to present the rest of the chapter of this report. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for this comprehensive review. We have received several questions, but more related to the organizational nature and where the report can be found on the European Environment Agency's website. But we have one question very quick for you, Sergio, before we go to Clara, on what is the main difference between nature-based solution and ecosystem-based adaptation?
Honestly speaking, there is no difference. They just started in different contexts. Ecosystem-based solution is another term which I think they've been started at the policy level, maybe in the Convention on Biological Diversity. It looks like it's resembling well the ecosystem-based approach. So there is no difference. They're all solutions inspired to the nature and try to preserve and using the nature for a climate change challenge.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And at this stage, I would like to invite Clara Veerkamp to introduce how nature-based solution can contribute to preserving and restoring biodiversity and reducing climate risk.
Yes,
Over to you, Clara.
Thank you, and thank you also for inviting me to this webinar. So I would like to provide some key findings from our chapter 3, which Sergio introduced earlier to you. And in this chapter, we try to provide an overview of the scientific knowledge on nature-based solutions for addressing climate risk. Let's see. Well, we tested it, but here we are. So what we see in Europe, and I mean, you're all aware of this, that there are already multiple climate impacts happening on our different sectors, such as water management, forestry, agriculture. But at the same time, that our knowledge on how to use nature to address these climate impacts is rapidly expanding. And we find this back in the scientific evidence base. So we went to the literature and searched there for evidences on this topic. And while we see various options of nature-based solutions across the different sectors, you could say you can classify them into 3 different interventions. It either can be a conservation or restoration of ecosystems, think about floodplains, or think about the restoration of landscapes so that they can provide the key benefits to address climate change. But you also can have the intervention covering sustainable management and climate proofing of ecosystem. Think about like the diversification of in agriculture and forest landscapes. And then, of course, we have the creation of new or more engineered ecosystems. Here you can think about the green roofs or the hybrid solutions, which we can find back in the coastal management. And what all these different interventions have in common is, of course, what Sergio mentioned earlier, is that they have provided multiple benefits. So the multifunctionality is a key advantage when you compare to more gray and gray or traditional solutions, which means that with the help of nature, you can increase the resilience to climate change, while you also address other societal challenges and providing additional societal benefits. Think about human health and well-being. And also at the fundament of successfully implementing nature-based solutions is, of course, the biodiversity. So as a precondition, you have to support biodiversity to be successful. And well, as I said, while we see that the knowledge base is expanding, I think in this chapter we also highlight some key knowledge gaps to further improve the knowledge base and to make the implementation of nature-based solutions more successful. For instance, there is also a certain degree of vulnerability of nature-based solutions to climate change, but we haven't found too much information on that topic. So, and especially on the long term. So how will climate change impact our ecosystem and this the provisioning of services and benefits in the future? Also, there is a lack of knowledge on the net effectiveness of nature-based solutions. So what we found is that, yes, we know a lot about especially about the environmental benefits, but what about the social, culture, and the economic benefits? And here the knowledge base is much more is smaller than when compared to the environmental benefits knowledge. Another key important element is the need for stakeholder involvement for co-designing your nature-based solutions, but also to assess the values of nature-based solutions. As people have different perception on the values of nature, it is very crucial to involve them in the process. And of course, the synergies and trade-offs between different nature-based solutions, but also compared to great infrastructure is needed. And when I talk about trade-offs, you can think about like the cost, like what is the cost to investment cost, but also the maintenance cost, but also like potential negative consequences of a nature-based solution which could occur. Important to consider in your in your assessment of nature-based solutions. So, and I think that also links to the last point, links to what Sergio have shown in chapter 2 already, is what is needed here is like a simple and measurable indicator so that you can start comparing different nature-based solutions, but also comparing between different sites or between different cities, for instance. And also evaluation tools, including long-term studies, are crucial here, and the integrated assessment method who can look on the assessment from different perspectives. And I think I would like to leave it for now here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have several questions now coming in. I was still trying to go through them and my microphone was frozen for a second. Clara, apologize for that. So we have, for example, one question about from Asi Mundlu asking, many nature-based solutions can be small scale and local, and asking for examples for large scale nature-based solutions and project. If you feel like to taking this question, otherwise we leave it for Marianne. And I would take also the question from Sorin asking about what is the difference between green blue infrastructure and nature-based solution.
Okay, thanks a lot. Coming to the first question, yeah, a large-scale nature-based solution could be the restoration of floodplains to enhance the flood control in certain areas. That would be an example. And coming to the second question, the difference between green and blue infrastructure and nature-based solution. Well, I think the difference is that a nature-based solution is addressing a problem. So it will be a solution to a problem where you can make use of nature, which you can define as green or blue infrastructure. So I think it's more how you apply the green or blue infrastructure, which would describe the difference.
Thank you very much, Clara.
Welcome.
And with this, I would like to invite Marianne to show us more example of best practice example and inspiring example of nature-based solution. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much also for inviting me in on this webinar. So I'd like to talk about the chapter 4, where we look at a number of examples across Europe. Let's see if I can get this to work. Yes, so we looked at 97 cases in the end, and we looked at a number of map platforms that are also described in an annex in this report. So we basically took what everybody can access and wanted to go across the Europe, so a good geographical spread, but also looking at different societal challenges that are addressed and in different sectors and thematic areas. And of course, that it had to have NBS as a core of the project. And these projects could be from the planning stage all through to the implementation stage. So it's not only projects that have implemented a specific NBS on the ground. And the information we collected from these map platforms involve objectives, co-benefits, what exact type of NBS were realized, how they describe stakeholder involvement, and we also analyze the innovativeness and transferability, and that is in a very close collaboration with chapter 3, what Clara just talked about. And so the chapter 4 describes these different sectors and thematic areas, covering all these cases and drawing out a synthesis from this. And based on that, we selected 11 example cases. So they are by no means representative of NBS in Europe. This exercise was not for that purpose. And we wanted to look at cases that were particularly multifunctional and innovative, and have a good transferability opportunity, and as well representing different areas in Europe. So we described there in an annex then the societal challenges addressed, the NBS, evaluated the main results, evidence, quantification at best on effectiveness of NBS, how innovative they are. Let me see, can't see the whole screen, and especially what lessons learned. So you can read that in the report, but just to give you a flavor, I'd like to show you two very different cases that we used as example cases. But first, to the overview of the geographic spread, as you see here on the map. And what we find from this exercise is that nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction have really become more prominent across Europe, but especially at urban level. And that also reflects the focus of funding at European level to urban scale, but also that there's a particular level of stress in urban areas with regard to climate. We find that efficiency is really context specific, so both in terms of time, space, but also the local socio-ecological conditions. And it also very much depends on the planning regime, the financing options and possibilities, and the regulation regimes. How ambitious are, for instance, cities willing to be in terms of implementing NBS at a systemic scale? So that's very different across the areas and the cases, and that also goes to show that it will be difficult to find common standards. But we shouldn't stop at that, of course. Well, we also realize that the quantitative estimates of cost-benefit ratios and monitoring can really help mainstream NBS for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction into regulations, norms, and plans. But through the cases that we screened, only 15% actually analyzed what the results come out of the implementation of the NBS. But about half the cases explicitly highlight the importance of stakeholder involvement, of dialogue and co-design from a very early stage. And in the next example, I'd like to show that from Hamburg. So that's one of the 11 examples that we pull out of the about 100 cases. And in Hamburg, they have estimated that the urban heat island effect is expected to add 5 degrees to average temperature increase by the end of the century. So basically doubling or more the temperatures that residents are going to experience at the end of the century in Hamburg. But they're also experiencing more extreme precipitation events while having a growing number of residents in the city. So they have built on 4 pillars here. They started already in 2014 with a regulation to demand green roofs on all new local plans and setting a standard for the thickness of the green roof and the surface level. And for all existing local plans, they implemented incentives covering about half of costs for green roof, and since last year also for green walls. And they have, since before 2014, had a dialogue with stakeholders from the building industry, housing association, urban planners and architects on how to actually design this regulation and the incentives. And they continue to have biannual formal meetings in the stakeholder groups to evaluate the effectiveness of their policy. And the policy has also been underpinned by science. So the Technical University of Hamburg has been working on monitoring the effectiveness of green roofs, comparing the types of green roofs. They have analyzed life cycle costs and evaluated the instruments, and it was very positive what came out, but you can read more in the report. And another project, the last I would just like to highlight, is an example from the Pyrenees, where 10,000 square kilometers of the Pyrenees are in risk of flooding, rockfalls, landslides, debris flows, and snow avalanches because of extreme precipitation. And you can see the bottom picture here is a till slope that suffers from erosion and landslides. And on the top picture, you see an example of a 100-year-old NBS that was installed in 1915 with drywall terracing and revegetation of slopes. And the idea of this project, Fusikos, is to reinvent this old technique that had been partly forgotten. And part of that project is especially the dialogue with local stakeholders and residents to co-design the strategies of turning this risk around, looking at what funding schemes and the monitoring systems, but also especially to continuously monitor how are people perceiving these NBS, the big changes that will happen, the well-being of this, in addition to, of course, monitoring the effectiveness of reducing risks. And as an add-on, another opportunity through NBS is the job creation. So the implementation of this NBS is all planned through local SMEs, co-funded by EU and 2 regional organizations. So those were 2 examples highlighted from the report. Thank you very much.
Very much, Marianne. I have one question from Paul Hudson for you. And this refers to, given the nature-based solution rely on stakeholder engagement for long-run success, what is the potential for social conflicts arising from implementing nature-based solution? So if the people have different values, hold different values about or of the nature, they also want to use the land in a different way. So do you have any example of or an answer to how to solve social conflicts arising from nature-based solution?
Yeah, and that's, of course, you can say that you might open a box of Pandora when you open up a process to people with their different values and aesthetics and also vested interest in this. One aspect is to do it voluntarily. Another strand is to work a lot on awareness raising and education and training. Oftentimes it's our traditional ways of looking at landscapes and nature and our cities that make us block what we plan to do. And oftentimes people also are afraid of not being heard. So our experience through looking through these cases, the very early integration of co-design dialogue that allows all views to be heard and to have a proper process can help this. But of course, there will inevitably be conflicts. And I recall from the Fusikos project in Norway, another case they have, people don't want the NBS, but others would like it. So it's a conflict and how to solve that. And dialogue is the way ahead. And oftentimes it's also a question of people experience it as a risk. And how can they make sure that if this NBS does not work, will I have a bigger cost coming out of it? So it's this cost burden sharing that is very important to take up front. But it is central, but for that reason, it can also be very difficult.
Thank you very much, Marianne. At this stage, I would like to change my hat and step a little bit into the discussion about the report and give you some insight about the report that about the chapter that I coordinated, and that was about how to finance nature-based solution. And Sergio will replace me as the moderator. So we look at disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation as two complementary areas of policy and action, and basically visualized as the two lines of the same DNA, if you want. And there are number of policy fields or thematic fields that contribute to strengthening the synergies between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. That includes risk assessment, governance, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. But it also includes the nature-based solution and disaster and climate finance. And in this report, we focused on the interplay of disaster and climate finance and nature-based solution, or how the nature-based solution can be sustainably funded. So the previous panelists make a very strong case about nature-based solution contributing to reducing a range of climate-related risk. Of course, a nature-based solution can dissipate energy, can moderate runoff, water runoff, and a number of physical processes that eventually create negative impact on societies. But the ecosystem services, of course, have an economic value in the context of DRR and CCA climate adaptation. But many often there is no price actually paid for the provision or maintenance those services. And the failure to account for this economic or social contribution of nature or nature-based solution, the failure leads to market distortion and eventually insufficient level of protection of nature and biodiversity. So in the report, we look into a number of financial and economic instruments that encourage preservation of nature and biodiversity and contribute to designing a comprehensive financial protection strategies, building on a portfolio of those different instruments. and those might include risk-based actuary and pricing that can create incentive for investment in loss reduction. That's also shown on the figure on left above line. You see investment before the disaster basically shift part of the cost, reduces the impact, and shift translate the future impact and future financial or economic burden into cost of investment before the disaster occurs, and of course reduces much. There's a lot of saving by investing in prevention or preparedness to similar events. There are a number of other instruments like catastrophe bonds that are collateralized instrument that pay off in the occurrence of defined catastrophic event. But there was also a range of other bond-like instruments like resilient impact bonds that remunerate the investor based on how well resilient measures are implemented and how well they perform. So there are different narratives, how to show the value of investing through nature. For example, on the second figure, we have a exceedance probability curve, and the green area is basically the area that can be avoided, avoidance of future impact from extreme climate or weather-related events based on implementation of prevention structure, in many cases nature-based solution. The other figures basically show that the ecosystem ability to contribute to reducing disaster risk is based on non-linear processes, and when certain thresholds are crossed, then many often we lose much more than we can afford. And the final figure is from microeconomic policy, basically when the value of nature-based solution is factored in the economic cost-benefit assessment, then it can really contribute to preventing the risk and reducing the future cost. So there's a little bit the background. I included also a few examples. Green bonds, for example, was pioneered by the European Investment Bank. It's a debt instrument focusing on environmentally friendly and sustainable initiative, green infrastructure, water management, or biodiversity. For example, the water utility might issue green bond to finance green infrastructure to reduce pluvial flood hazard in the cities, and it's repaired by stormwater feeds. It's a relatively simple design, but very efficient in order to internalize the externality from the development. More sophisticated example, this is how insurance and insurance policies have been harnessed in order to create a financial instrument for protection of ecosystem services. The coral, this Coastal Zone Management Trust was established as a pilot project by the Nature Conservancy together with Swiss Re, and it's basically the first insurance scheme that insures not the property on the coast, but the ecosystem itself. So basically it has been established in order to quickly repair the damage to the coral reef and restoring the capacity to reduce the impact on the coast by storm surges after a significant event has damaged the coral reef. So those similar examples, there are many. There's been a collection by Insure Resilience Initiative produced an interesting report of showing several of similar examples where the financial or economic instruments can really contribute to paying or financing ecosystem restoration and nature-based solution. And with that, I pass the floor to Sergio.
Thank you, Jaroslav. I was checking the chat, the question and answer session. There was a question regarding the financing about the comparison between the cost of a gray solution and MBS. Can you reply to this question? Can you give some elements for a reflection on that? Jaroslav?
Of course, yes, thank you for that question. Of course, we cannot generalize, as the cost-benefit analysis will need to be looked at specific circumstances where we compare the nature-based solution compared to the grey infrastructure. So it really depends on the specific context. Generally, what we can say is the nature-based solutions typically help to avoid or reduce the impact on more frequent and less intense climate extremes. So up to certain level, also a little bit more intense, but there the capacity of the ecosystem to reduce the impact is diminishing. So ideally, depending on the standards of protection and the safety standards that we need to impose on specific places, it's often a combination of nature-based solution with grey infrastructure. So combine green, grey pieces of infrastructure might, in many cases, help. But you know, depending really on the context, the cost-benefit ratio might be in favor of nature-based solution in many cases, especially for the more frequent, less intense events. In other cases, they need to be complemented with other type of measures.
Okay, thank you, Jaro. Now you trigger another couple of questions about the financing, but I'd like to pass to Clara and to Marianne. But anyway, I want to make sure the participant, because there are a couple of requests, the presentation, I think they will be available, I guess, on the website of CMCC, or the recording of the webinar will be available. So they were asking about the presentation, some participant. Anyway, now I want to pass to Clara. I tried to collect, to wrap up a couple of questions together. So basically, until now, still we don't have a complete evidence on the multifunctionality of NBS for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So not all the benefits are integrated in the, and also the data they don't cover on the NBS long-term frame. So how do you see the solution of that? How do you think which will be the new steps, the next steps to try to address this, and how to make the data comparable across the region? How can you compare one region to another region? And also how you can compare, but actually, yeah, it's linked to the question which was asked also to Jaroslav, how you compare the knowledge which has been developed on the grey solution to the knowledge which is underdeveloped for NBS. So I try to combine all these questions. So the floor is yours, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, indeed. There are some challenges in the knowledge gap, or yeah, so that we have to find ways how to further improve the knowledge gap and the knowledge base, sorry, to support the evidence-based implementation of nature-based solution. I think what was also mentioned during the presentation by my colleagues as well is to assess the net effectiveness. I think that you assess the multiple benefits, but also the cost and potential negative effects, what I've said earlier, to really showcase what is the effectiveness of our nature-based solution, and finding key performance indicators, which allow the comparison across the different nature-based solutions and make it comparable also to the grey solutions. I think that would be my answer. And of course, this long-term monitoring and evaluation, I think we have a lot of case studies out there where we can learn a lot from, which I've started, and I think Marianne showed that example earlier. Like there's a lot of knowledge, old knowledge on certain nature-based solutions, which we maybe have to have another look on it, and we can learn a lot from it, because there might be certain solutions out there, which are implemented a long time ago. So this could be interesting cases for learning from these cases.
Okay, thank you, Clara. I was checking the question and answer. Actually, yeah, Jaroslav, you trigger a couple of new questions, which I will come to you later after Marianne. For Marianne, there is an intriguing question, which is nice, about the transboundary. So let me try to see. Yes, it's been asked twice. My question was about the NBS and transboundary cooperation. Are there examples where countries cooperate together to implement NBS or EBA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually have about 5 cases among the 97 that are transboundary. Some have gone from Finland down to Italy, others are for instance, a life resilient forest project that looks at Portugal, Spain, and Germany. So those are quite different habitats or ecological zones, but they still work along the same challenges to avoid wildfires and how to generate a better economic out of forestry that can actually help increase resilience of forestry. So they work on demonstration and upscaling. So there are plenty of examples, and we have captured 5 of them. There's also a few collaborating along the Alps or between Belgium and Germany on nature reservation to align the management approaches and how to also include a better marketing and service development for tourism that actually with a bigger area you can reach out further and make people experience the beautiful nature that Europe holds. So we have some examples in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. I think I will go back to Jaroslav. Yeah, you triggered even one more. Finance is really a big part of our life. Are you aware of any community-based finance mechanism, such as local saving groups or urban poor funds within Europe or outside Europe that have successfully managed the implementation of urban MBS?
Yes. I would like to combine that also with the question to which you answer from Boria, whether there are, some examples from funding programs in Europe.
Yes.
So in the report, we covered a number of European structural investment funds and other funding sources that can be triggered, that might be activated as a part of the financial, to cover the financial cost of the nature-based solution, that include live projects. Live projects can be applied also at the local city level and can be really be based for the community-based type of actions to implement nature-based solution. From the more institutionalized financial instruments, US community insurance scheme really encourages the property owner to coordinate their activities at the community level to set a ambition in terms of how much of urban green or other nature-based solution in the cities could be implemented in order to reduce the flood hazard, for example, or windstorm hazard and risk. And those activities are then accounted for in the state subsidized insurance schemes. So this is one practical example of the community actions where you have a coordination of different property owners in order to align the choices regarding land use and the property protection and obtain a benefit in terms of reduced insurance premium. There are a number of other schemes that could be applied at the community level. That's local taxes, for example, can be redesigned in order to favor adoption of nature-based solution and reduction of surface runoff or other natural phenomena causing damage. The agriculture incentives and the payment from European agriculture policy might be designed in a way to encourage water retention on the low value agriculture land compared to high value economic value of developed land like city centers. The number of schemes in Italy, for example, we have the easement, land easement as a part of the solution, where the farmers are obliged to accept occasional flood on the agricultural land, a flood that is basically induced, controlled by the authorities in order to prevent the flood to occur in the downtown or settlements where those floods can cause higher damage, and they are compensated for these. So you might look at these like payment for ecosystem services. We have additional schemes where really the farmers or the landowners are paid for certain measures that reduce disaster risk, and mostly those intervention might be based on nature-based solution or return to traditional soil management techniques and so on. So there are a number of examples, and you will find in the report many of them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jaro. Okay, I think there are other questions. I'm trying to make a combined question for Clara. I remember in the chapter 3, and also we mentioned in the conclusion, the chapter 6, we have an outline of gaps, which you and Johanna Foster, as a lead author with your colleague of chapter 3, you have been addressing, you have been identifying in your analysis. Can you just briefly, because some questions have been basically dealing with that, can you briefly try to outline the most relevant gaps which they don't actually stop the implementation of MBS, but maybe they can solve some barriers to the knowledge and to the implementation. Can you help us on this?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Well, I think a key knowledge gap was what I've mentioned earlier as well, is focusing that there is a lot of knowledge on the environmental benefits, so the water retention, the carbon sequestration, etc., but is less often assessed as like what is the benefit to people, like in economic terms, but also in social cultural terms. So I think there is much more work needed there to translate that information to what is it and how far does it help human well-being and health, and also in that way to adapt to climate change. And also, I think it was mentioned earlier as well, is what are the potential negative consequences of nature-based solution? I mean, especially because people value nature differently, they can have they can have different ideas on what is good and what is bad, put it in very simple words. So we have to be aware of what could be seen as negative as well. I don't say that there are more negative than positive benefits or impacts of nature. I think our knowledge base shows that there are many potential positive benefits, but we have to be aware of the potentially negative consequence of nature-based solutions, and what also the costs which we have to include in our assessment to just make the picture complete. I think that is also the strongest argument to, if you want to convince regional decision makers or national or just within the municipality, that you have your numbers clear. So let's put it in that way. I think I will leave it by that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think in the chapter 3 you identify some sectors, some thematic area, which I think they are the most relevant for the adaptation. We didn't address the energy sector because it was requiring a different kind, also more workload, and I think potentially future report from the EEA or from other projects will address that. So how the MBS can help also in the energy sector, renewable energy, I mean, yes. Now, there is a perfect question for Marianne, just popping out here. How, I mean, you already explained that, but actually, this is an intriguing question. How have you selected the European case study? Different selection could change conclusions?
You're absolutely right. Well, when we went through, we were several people doing this, and we had a common template for doing this and discussed it continuously. So when we split up the platforms between us, and we had the set of criteria. So when we came up, for instance, across the 5th case that dealt with the same thing at the same scale in an urban area, and it didn't really add a value, we took that out. Of course, then diving down to that, you might have found that they experienced a difference barrier or conflict that the first case did not. And for that reason, we also don't say that this is a comprehensive review and it's representative. It's rather a collection of examples of the diversity of cases. And we've really tried to capture cases in different scales across Europe in the different sectors. But it also showed that there is an overwhelming amount of urban cases. Of the 97, 43 are from urban areas. So that also goes to show the bias, you might argue, for what is on the platforms. But to my mind, that also goes to show where has been the major part of research and funding to work on nature-based solution. Doesn't say that in agriculture there's not as many cases, but it's not as dominant in these platforms. So yes, it could have had a different flavor, but we wouldn't have found, I would argue, a complete different set of conclusions or key messages from this.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. I think I have one last question for Jaroslav. I ask you to be very brief, and the answer is about, I think you already mentioned, but there was this new question. Your financing examples are paid by taxpayers. I wonder how you see the potential for private finance MBS, not just example, but potential for scaling up. Yeah, great discussion. I was very happy about the discussion. Yes,
Joan, thank you very much for that question. I wish I could unmute you and ask you to take the floor and offer your view on that. Of course, my private opinion is that there's a huge potential that has not been exploited yet. So I do see, a number of possibilities how to encourage the private investment in nature-based solution, not only for disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation, but taking into account the whole range of benefits from re-naturing or bringing back nature into the city, including the psychological distress strategies. Like when we look at the COVID-19 measures, I think across Europe we have started to appreciate more the green areas close to our homes, especially when our mobility is restricted to 200 meters from your home. Then of course we pay more attention to the nature around us, not only on the large scale as the contribution to the disaster risk reduction, but really for a number of reasons, for leisure, for health, and so on. So I do see there a lot of potential, but I'm very sorry that I cannot unmute your microphone in order to offer you the opportunities to share your views on to what extent the private potential, private funding could be mobilized. But I would like to ask a question to Sergio, because there are a number of very interesting questions that might also be posted to Sergio, who kindly took over the moderation role. And one of those was, let me just check, I lost this. Yes, the Green Deal. The Green Deal call and the Horizon Europe has included a number of research calls for filling the knowledge gaps on the effects of nature-based solution or the behavioral changes that might be triggered in order to increase the acceptance, social acceptance of these. But Sergio, but also anybody else from the panel, what is your take on the research gaps and knowledge gaps that we really need to cover in order to make the move to a large-scale uptake of the nature-based solutions? So what is your private or personal take on the knowledge gaps that would help us to overcome this challenge of bringing the nature to the scale? Right, Sergio first, and next Clara and Marianne.
Thank you. I will be brief. So I think before the Green Deal and before H2020, the Horizon 2020, there was the only knowledge we had was basically a practical knowledge, and especially on the green infrastructure at the urban level. The H2020 introduced new calls which funded, create nice calls around 20 projects, I think, called more or less MBS demonstration project. This project, they've been combined all the outcome, and they produce the commission with the project coordinators, and some of you, you've been involved on that. I think all of you actually, you've been involved. I was working at the EEA, so I was on the other side. You've been involved in producing this report, and now the knowledge based on the MBS now as an umbrella concept emerged a lot, and this, I think, was seminal, was really important and key for building up the structure, a part of the structure of the Green Deal. The Green Deal has NBS inside, has nature, biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation challenge inside. So it's not only about climate, it's actually about transformation of our society. So I think NBS, they've been really key in setting up part of the Green Deal. And I think the research gap are still there, as Clara has been mentioning correctly, and also some practicality, some knowledge considering the implementation NBS are still there. The challenge is there, but we already have enough to start to build up efficient NBS.
Thank you, Sergio. And if we can take this also as the final question to Clara and Marianne, would you like to share your thoughts on this? Where are the knowledge gaps or research gaps that you identified through your work?
Yeah, I think I completely agree here with what Sergio said, and indeed we have there are some challenges, or there are some gaps in the knowledge, and there is more research needed. But we have a lot of knowledge out there, and I think it is important to make this the benefits visible. And I feel like there's also great momentum right now. I mean, we're all sitting at home and looking for going out into nature. So the value of nature, I think, is much more closer now to us. So take that story as well for bringing up the nature-based solution story. Thank you.
And Marianne.
Yeah, I'd like to say that even if the evidence base is growing, there's still a lot of quantitative results that haven't been analyzed and developed yet. For instance, on the cost effectiveness of NBS, we all say it's cost effective, but if you want to look into this, you don't find many proper studies that look at the cost effectiveness of NBS or the cost benefit ratios. And it depends on what benefits do you include in order to get a low or a high cost benefit ratio, and how do we standardize that? So I'd advise you also, I put in the chat a new report that came out last week by 17 Horizon 2020 NBS projects and collaborating institutions that really look at how setting up a framework for evaluating NBS. And then a final thing I'd like to say is the potential for NBS to also add in the just transition is huge. And I think we have to bring that much more into play, especially on social vulnerability in adaptation and the access to green areas. For instance, in Southern Europe, the access generally to green areas is much lower than in Northern Europe, but how is that distributed within cities and landscapes? So.
Thank you very much, Marianne. And this is all we had time for today. But before we close the webinar, I would like to pass the floor to Sergio, who will tell us about the next opportunities discussing nature-based solution in the context of European Climate Change Adaptation Conference.
Thanks a lot, Jaroslav. Yes, this year, the traditional European Climate Change Adaptation Conference, which usually takes place every 2 years, has been adapted to the COVID crisis. And so we have an online, like other conference this year, an online modality. We have a specific webinar of 2.5 hours on the 27th of May in the afternoon, just after lunch, from 1:30 p.m. to 4 p.m., which is on nature and climate change adaptation, so NBS and all the different terms related to the umbrella concept. So I invite you to register to the ECA. You see on the slide the website of ECA, www.eca21.eu. There are 9 webinars spanning from communication to coastal areas to NBS, and you can register to all of them. And also we have on the 22nd of June an high-level forum where we will combine all the knowledge emerged from the webinar, and they will be discussed from high-level policy makers at the European level. So I invite you to check the website. I invite you to register to the webinar, which actually involve also some of the lead author and contributing author and reviewer of the report, which we've been producing through the EEA and the ETC. So thanks a lot to Jaro to give me this opportunity to advertise the ECA, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for this. I encourage you to register very quickly because I have seen that several of the ECA webinars have been booked out already. So hopefully there are some spaces or seats in the NBS webinar still. With that, I would like to thank distinguished panelists, Sergio Castellari, Clara Veerkamp, and Marianne Zandersen, as well as to the CMCC communication team that prepared this webinar, and especially to you for having participated in the webinar and asked very interesting and very important question. With that, thank you again to all of you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Jaroslav. Thank you, CMCC, for organizing. Bye-bye.